But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of this opportunity for this nation. So we have come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to open the doors of opportunity for all of God's children. Now is the time to lift from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of this moment. This is our hope. This is the faith with which I will return to the South. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of a mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. A legacy of countless dead, an infinite spectrum of human suffering, profound economic decline, and above all, enormous human humiliation. It has brought us horrors that fortunately you have not known. I shall therefore limit myself to a single idea. The specific experience I'm talking about has given me one great certainty. Consciousness precedes being, and not the other way around. For this reason, the salvation of this human world lies nowhere else than in the human heart, in the human power to reflect in human meekness and in human responsibility.
Please rise in body or in spirit as we sing Fuente de Amor, Spirit of Life. you. Please be seated.
Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, trespassing into prophetic imagination. For more than a century, Unitarians and Universalists have been on the front lines against abolition, irreplaceable in the effort to promote equality across gender. And now in Arizona, we are determined to ensure that our UU presence matters, to be a witness against the systematic oppression of the recent immigration legislation. Today is a sacred homecoming for me, to be here amongst you and with you, keepers of the peace and justice at Justice GA. This song, Spirit of Life, has walked with me and defenders through the prisons and through challenging times, as have the inspiration of countless Unitarian Universalists who have gone before us and are present with us today. And then there are the words of Unitarian Universalist Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. These words have journeyed with us and been adopted and shared by courageous defenders everywhere who are working to end torture as an investigative tool. Lawyers who are going to court in many countries and standing up and saying it's illegal to be tortured, and then finding themselves handcuffed, taken to prison, and becoming the embodiment of what they're fighting for. But these words, take courage, friends. The road is often long, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. These powerful words have invited us and invoked us into a journey together. And so that the refrain, but deep down, there is another truth, you are not alone, becomes a journey for us together. I invoke these words today as they become a journey for us together, as we invite you also together into our journey, into the fulfillment of prophetic imagination. It is a journey that needs UU support and your voice. This journey began for me in 1994 when I walked into a prison in Cambodia and met a 12-year-old boy who had been tortured and denied access to counsel. And as I looked into his eyes, I realized that for the hundreds of letters that myself and colleagues wrote for political prisoners, we wouldn't have written a letter for this 12-year-old boy because he was not an important political prisoner who did anything important for anyone. He was just a 12-year-old boy who had stolen a bicycle. I realized, too, the irony of the situation is that the Cambodian government, like 93 other governments in the world that were still torturing, were open to having people come in to help them, specifically because they were not important political prisoners, but just ordinary people who were tortured because they did not have the resources to afford a lawyer. Since that time, in the year 2000, I founded an organization, International Bridges of Justice, to support defenders working to end torture as an investigative tool. And I will say that they have done so courageously with almost no support. But that is because in many ways, they are like the Samaritans, but they don't yet have the word good attached to them. Meaning, as you remember, in those days, the Samaritans were considered sort of the lowliest of the lows. And yet it was a Samaritan who stopped to help the bloodied traveler while the priest walked away and the Levite walked away. And many of these defenders throughout the world are actually the ones who are standing up to ensure that people are not being tortured, but they themselves are doubly outcasted in many ways. When I first worked in Cambodia in 1994, there were less than 10 attorneys in the country because they had all been killed by the Khmer Rouge. And even as you walked into prisons, you would see not only kids, but maybe a woman who had been there for 10 years, and she'd say, "Oh, I'm here because my husband committed a crime." But what was interesting is that she didn't feel bad about it because it was just the way things were. And courageously, defenders who came together for the first time began to imagine a different world where there could be a lawyer or someone to stand up for them. They fought against the system. They built it step by step through their own prophetic imagination. And today I'm happy to say that they have established public defender offices through many of the provinces in Cambodia, And in those provinces where they've established public defender offices, there is virtually no torture. They've been followed not only in Cambodia, but also in Burundi, Zimbabwe, India, where 5 people are tortured to death every single day, by other lawyers who have begun to see a new vision of what is possible. In the actions of those courageous defenders lives the wisdom of the great Gaul, who commanded Jonathan Livingston Seagull, "Begin to press power into your new wings. Find out who you are. See who you are becoming." We must never be limited by the experiences of our past or by our limited vision of who we are in the present. Instead, let our vision for ourselves encompass our dreams and what we hope to create for the future. Let it be who we are becoming. How do we become, though? Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh once said, when he was asked, "What can we do to save the world?" He paused and he thought for a while, and everyone thought it was going to be a very complicated answer. And he answered back very simply, "In order for us to save the world, we only have to begin by allowing ourselves to hear the cries of the world." And so I want to thank you today for all that you do to allow yourselves to hear the cries of the world. And I know that sometimes it's tough. And one thing that I've learned is that even though it's tough, it isn't always that we need to be tough in order for this movement to happen and for us to dance into the movement in beautiful ways. I realize today that the success of our movement depends not only on our warrior selves, but also the characteristics of the Shambhala warrior, who understands that we must bring compassion and interconnectedness to the very corridors of power. In the words of Tibetan monk Chögyam Trungpa, vision and practicality can be joined together in nowness. Too often people think that solving the world's problems is based on conquering the earth, rather than touching the earth. I learned to touch the ground and the earth in my human rights work many years ago. And since then, spirituality, which had not been part of my approach or my work, became the basis of what I do. It was maybe over 20 years ago in Cambodia when, after being threatened on numerous occasions and couldn't find any other guidance, I went to Sister Rose, who was a sister at the Missionaries of Charity in Cambodia. And I said to her, I'm being threatened by these police officers. It seems like a really uphill battle, and I don't really know what to do. Can you give me some thoughts? And I remember she stopped and she paused and she thought for a while. And I was asking for advice on human rights work. And she always gave me good advice. And this time she looked at me and she said, Karen, if you really want to transform the world, or to transform not even the whole world, but just these prison people who are torturing, or the judges or the prosecutors of the system, then whatever you do, you must always stop and look for and then find the Christ or the Buddha in each person. Because she really believed in the power of transformative love. And I saw through the years that she was right, that there was something, and people were transformed on our journey. Like my meditation teacher, she believed in the power of transformative love. And what was profound for me is the realization that when we do something in the world, we do it not only for the world, but we do it for the transformation of ourselves. In The Fruitful Darkness, Joan Halifax said, Gandhi was asked by his friend if his objectives in serving the poor were purely humanitarian. Gandhi replied, "Not at all. I am here to serve no one but myself, to find my own self-realization through the service of these village folks. India's liberation is Gandhi's. Ultimately, the transformation of others is our transformation. I remember a time in Vietnam, it says about 10 years ago, actually it was about 20 years ago, when I met a man who was doing amazing things, and he had a safe house for kids. And normally when you would walk in the streets or sometimes go into the airports, you'd have these kids that were kind of a nuisance. They'd be like pickpocketing you and things. And he had taken these kids, and I was amazed when I went in there. They were playing games, they were supporting each other. They were doing all kinds of community exercises as kids to find ways of supporting each other. And I said to him, wow, this is really an amazing thing that you're doing for these kids. And he said, well, let me tell you a story. He said, it's not really for the kids. He told me that previously he had been a heroin addict, and he himself was in and out of prisons all the time. And he said, one day I was on the streets out of prison, and I saw the police come and pick up a young boy for stealing an egg. And as they beat him and took him away, I looked at my friends and I said, it's one thing if this happens to us, because we're adults and we maybe should know better, but it's not fair that it's happening to these young kids. So he said he took off his hat and he passed the hat, and people put in little amounts of money. And then they decided right then and there that they would do something, no matter what it was. And so they started on Sunday having these little programs where the kids just could come for free and for that one day be kids. And they would give them haircuts and whatnot. And what ended up happening is they ended up building a safe house for them. And what he said to me is, he said, listen, I thought that I was going to transform these kids, but in the process of trying to transform their lives, I myself was transformed. You see, he said, I'm no longer a heroin addict. I think it's a powerful testament that when we do the things to transform a situation, we ourselves see a transformation within. I see today that there is an urgent opportunity for us as Unitarian Universalists to transform not only the world and ourselves, but also to be a voice that is increasingly relevant. As I mentioned earlier, of the 113 countries that torture, 93 of these countries have already passed laws. There are governments who are willing, if we will support them, and there are defenders on the ground every day who are looking for our support in order to build legal systems so that people can have early access to counsel and that we can systematically make sure that torture as an investigative tool in developing countries where there are laws no longer exists. Torture as an investigative tool in these countries is 100% preventable. And I believe that if we decide as a world community to commit, that we can make this an end in our lifetimes. As Unitarian Universalists, we have covenanted to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, to promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, with respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part of. These words of prophetic men and women challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil. But we must also remember the words of James Luther Adams. Beautiful attitudes, he says, but attitudes alone do not make or change history. The road to hell is paved with good attitudes. They require institutional embodiment. So I wonder, where are we going, both as individuals and as a community of faith? Where are we taking our story now? Where are we in the enactment of our real commitment to our ideals and values? How can we best rise to the occasion of reaching our highest hope, reflected in the responses of fulfilling the Promise Survey, to become a visible and influential force for good in the world, in the co-creation of this history? Viktor Frankl was once asked the question, what is the meaning of life? And he says, it's not for us to ask the question, what is the meaning of life, but for us to be prepared when life comes to us and says, what meaning have you given to me? The history of Unitarian Universalism has shown us to be co-creators of history, not passive observers. Whether we as Unitarian Universalists respond or choose not to respond to these calls has consequences not only for the world, the tortured and abused of the world, and the history we are currently co-creating in our world, but also for us individually as Unitarian Universalists who have covenanted to play an active role in this world. I ask today, too, that we make ending torture as an investigative tool in our lifetime part of our UU legacy. And this is because it's needed for the world. That we stand also for the Samaritans of today, that we protect those who are most vulnerable in society. I was with a friend yesterday, and I was saying, sometimes it's like a big stone, and we feel like we're going uphill with it. And she said, but it's not that bad, because if everyone joins together, we could dance on that stone, and it'll break into lots of pieces. And then each person can take his little stone and go up that mountain, go up that hill, and we can create history while we dance together. So you may be saying to me now, that's great, I'm happy to dance with you, but what can I really do? And the first thing I want to say is that your presence matters. And this was brought home to me just about a month ago when I was with my son in Cambodia. I have a 9-year-old son. And I said to him one day, can you come help mommy in Cambodia? And he looked at me, he was on his computer, and he said, yeah, okay, but what can I really do? And I said, well, I don't know, but you should come and see. And as he came with me, we went to the prisons, and we went to all different places. And what I noticed is that people changed because he was there. So we were in a meeting with the Minister of Justice, and it wasn't anything brilliant, my son said, I can pretty much assure you that. But within minutes, the Ministry of Justice leaned over, he looked at my son, and he said to me, I think we should work on getting all the kids out of prison. What do you think? And what I realized at that moment, thanks. What I realized at that moment was that his presence matters, and all of our presence matters. There are many unexpected blessings that we find on our journey as we allow ourselves to walk into the darkness in order to find the light. So yes, your presence matters. And also, take action. Form a covenant group around issues or this issue to see what can be done. Have your congregation become a communities of conscience that partners with a specific public defender or defender office in Asia or Africa. Decide to put together a declaration of intent. Fund a justice maker. More importantly, though, be alive to this adventure in life and let the words and blessings surround you. I wanted to end with the person who has inspired not only my son, but me in my journey. And this is, you might have heard about him before, but this is Vishna. And Vishna is a little boy that I met who lived in the prisons in Cambodia. He lived in the prisons because he was born in the prison. And because he was born in the prison, the guards even loved him. Everyone loved him, but even the guards. And when he was a baby, they let him slip in and out of the bars. You know how bars are. There's holes in them. So they'd let him slip in and out. And by the time I met him, he was 4 years old, which means he was getting bigger. And you know what gets bigger is your head. So he would have to climb up to the first set of bars, the second and the third, because the third was slightly bigger. And he would turn his body really carefully and then slowly turn his head and then come back down, 3, 2, 1, and grab my pinky. The reason is because he wanted to try and visit all 156 prisoners, or how many ever there were. And he would ask me to either lift him up so he could put his fingers through, or where there were dark cells and it was just a piece of iron and corrugated and open, he would really just go all the way down and slide his fingers through so they could touch his fingers. And most of the prisoners said to me, he's my greatest joy and my sunshine. And I always had an incredible sense of him because I realized that here's a 4-year-old boy. He's born with almost no material goods in the world, but he had a sense of his own heroic journey, that he was, like all of us, born into a heroic journey, and that he could do something. And I always thought, maybe my imagination, that he had the words of Edward Hale, that's in our UU hymnal, going through his head, saying, I am one, I am only one, I cannot do everything, but I can do something, and I will do the one thing that I can do. So please do the one thing that you can do. Please join us on this journey. Thank you for joining us on this journey. And may we trespass together into prophetic imagination.